Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session, Streamlining AI Agents for Streamlining Safety Net Applications. My name is Jillian Hammer. I'm a senior designer and researcher at Nava, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm joined by panelists and teammates Kaylin Van Noorstrand, software engineer at Nava, Stephen Rockwell, the Chief Innovation Officer at Benefit Navigator, and Sharna Woodby, the Assistant Director at First 5 Riverside County. I'll let them introduce themselves as we get into our panel. But first, we're just really excited to share a little bit more about our learning space project, where we're exploring how AI agents might help improve and streamline the benefit application process. So here's how we'll spend our time. I'll share a really quick overview of the project, including a demo, and then we'll move into the panel conversation where we'll share a little bit more about what we've learned so far, our process so far, and then open it up for Q&A. So feel free to put any questions you have in the panel as we go through the session, and we'll try our best to address them and address them at the end as well. So to start with just an introduction as sort of the systemic challenge that we're working within, we know that low-income families face complex, time-consuming processes to access their critical benefits, and as a result, a lot of households might not receive the assistance that they're entitled to because of administrative barriers. That comes as no surprise to us as FormFest attendees. We also know that the caseworkers who support them also spend a significant amount of time navigating through repetitive application tasks, which can lead to burnout and errors and turnover. So that's sort of where the idea of this agentic submission tool came from. Our project vision is to build an intelligent assistant that helps caseworkers complete applications more quickly. So the tool listens to client needs, analyzes available data, and pre-fills the forms accordingly. Really, the goal is to relieve caseworkers from that repetitive data entry so that they can spend more time supporting families. This is exciting because it's a new way of approaching forms using emerging technology, and it's technology that continues to evolve really rapidly. In fact, I want to give a shout out to the All Things AI session at FormFest last year, where we heard, I think it was Paul and Stevie Ray share a prototype of a project called Apply.ai that sort of demonstrated some early ideas of how AI agents could be used in navigating government forms. And it's really exciting to see how these sort of more dreamy and new ideas can converge and become such a reality in such a short amount of time because of the technology moving so quickly. But at a glance, at this moment in September of 2025, here are some of the ways that we're thinking about AI agents supporting the application process that we're exploring on our project. So at a high level, we're thinking about how an agent can take a look at what data might already be available about a specific client, whether that be in a case management system or through an eligibility screener, and then identify any kind of missing information that might be needed later downstream in the application process more upfront. From there, an agent could possibly pre-fill an application or multiple applications using that data that they already have, and then present it to the caseworker and their client to review and make sure that they make any changes that are necessary, make sure everything looks okay before submitting it. The agent could also submit the application across multiple different government portals and then provide a real-time sort of status update to the applicant about where they are in the process on the front end. This project is a partnership between Benefit Navigator, Nava Labs, and First 5 Riverside County. So a little bit on the roles of our team here. Nava is leading design and development. The Benefit Navigator team is providing some on-the-ground perspective through their eligibility tool. And First 5 Riverside is our government partner for piloting with their frontline staff and the families that they serve. So notably, our project is funded by a google.org generative AI accelerator grant. So we're working within a very tight timeline within their program. We're in the middle of design and development and testing and that sort of cycle right now. So what you'll see today is very much a work in progress. It's kind of a chance for us as a team to sit back and reflect together on what we've learned so far and how that might impact or drive the next phase of our work coming down the pike this fall, where we're looking at piloting with caseworkers in Riverside County, evaluating its success, its challenges, and then expand the use cases from there. But before talking about what's to come, I wanted to reflect a little bit about what we've learned in the discovery phase as we got to visit some of the family resource centers that Riverside provides to families in Riverside County. They're called family resource centers. They're community centers where staff help families who come in who are looking for specific services or resources, or come in sort of expressing whatever need they might have, and staff will help connect them to something that might help address those needs more directly. So we were able to go in person and interview and observe some caseworkers and their clients. And we learned about, all the different services and offerings that they provide. One of our takeaways was that helping clients apply for benefits is really just one of the many, many things that caseworkers at Riverside do for their families that they support. They're filling out the forms alongside them. They're not, assessing eligibility. They're really just there kind of going line by line within the forms to make sure that it's filled out accurately and that they can be connected to the resources and the benefits that they need. So in that way, caseworkers really take on the cognitive load of knowing how to navigate the system or multiple different systems sort of on behalf of their client. So ultimately, this tool that we're developing is for them, for the caseworkers. I wanted to share as well a little bit about what we learned in Discovery. It was really valuable to be there in person. Here are just a few of the things that we sort of took away that really have the biggest impact on our project approach. The first is that we know that trust is really built through that in-person, one-on-one support. We heard multiple times that clients really preferred to come in person, and I think that's really important to note, especially in 2025, where services are administered digitally or through some kind of an automated phone system. It was really important for clients to want to come in person, meet with a caseworker or a frontline staff member one-on-one, face-to-face, and talk through what they're facing and what kinds of services they could be connected to. So when thinking about, developing a new tool, we're thinking about it in that sort of how might we framework, and that we want to imagine, how might we build a tool that complements that existing conversation rather than distracting from it or even causing, distrust or fear. And introducing any kind of technology to an existing workflow that can cause, a fair amount of confusion or fear, and let alone if it's, a piece of technology that uses AI. So that's something that we're being really cognizant of as we develop the tool. And we want to make sure that in the end, the sort of in-person relationship is still at the core of the interaction. The next is that we saw really firsthand, just watching caseworkers enter data into multiple different systems, multiple different times, and just how much frustration that causes for the client who feels like they have to, share their story multiple times, and for the caseworker who doesn't get to spend their precious time, really sitting with the client and talking with them, but instead being distracted by having to go back and forth between, an online form or paper form, and doing intake. So that was something that we're thinking about. How can we leverage the data that already exists about a client, so the client only has to tell their story once, and the caseworker can then, go deeper or move on to observe even more clients in the same amount of time. Lastly, we heard that filling out the benefit applications themselves, the more challenging part for caseworkers is just knowing how to, represent the family scenarios that might be more complex or might be a little bit more uncommon on forms, and wanting to make sure that they have extra oversight for those situations. So when we're thinking about developing an AI tool, we want to make sure that the interface is empowering the users to be sort of experts in the nuances of how they need to represent their family on a form, and make sure that they feel like in the driver's seat of an experience, and not necessarily teaching them to defer to the AI, but rather, encouraging them to interject, to always have visibility into what the AI is doing at all times, and make sure that they can edit and refine. So from there, I'll show a quick demo video of the prototype. As is the nature of our work, it's already a few iterations before, iterations from where we are currently, but it does a good job of showing some of how we've incorporated some of the learnings from Discovery, some of our technical aspiration, and now a working front end all in one. So I'll play this video. It's narrated by Christine Wilkes, who is our product manager, and she'll kind of walk through the user experience here.
So the scenario here is a caseworker is sitting down with a client named Jimena Vargas. She's a mom looking for support to feed her child. The user is a caseworker sitting down with her to fill out an application for the Women, Infant, and Children, or WIC, federal program. Instead of asking for the same information repeatedly, the agent will start by retrieving the case management data on file for this client. Once it retrieves the user data, it will begin to load the WIC application on its own browser. Now that it's loaded, you'll see that it starts to fill out the application with the data it has available to it. You can see the agent talks through the reasoning as it makes decisions and fills in the form. We're still working through determining how much information is too much and testing users to make some design decisions around that. In our first round of usability testing, our users still wanted a fair amount of transparency from the agent. So you'll see it's making decisions around Jimena Vargas's information. It's determining whether or not an in-person, virtual, or telehealth appointment would be appropriate. And then one of the final steps of reasoning is determining the closest clinic to Jimena Vargas's home. So it's going to use the address on file to make that determination. Another key finding was that caseworkers want to be able to interject and stop the agent mid-process. So we've developed a solution to allow the caseworker to take over the agent's browser and click and fill out the form as desired. You'll see this in the final step, where the caseworker will take over the browser so that it can fill out the CAPTCHA. This would also be the ideal moment for the caseworker to review this information for accuracy, make sure that everyone's comfortable with it, and then hit submit rather than the agent.
Okay. With that, I will move us into the panel discussion. I know there's a ton there that we can discuss, so I'm excited for Kaylin and Stephen and Sharna to start to jump in here. Let me stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces a little bit bigger. So let's start with introducing ourselves a little bit and make sure that we're sort of staying grounded in the real world workflows that caseworkers and their clients experience when they're applying for benefits. So Sharna, I want to start with you. Can you introduce yourself and your role at First Five, but also start our conversation off by talking through, what are some of those barriers that families and their caseworkers face in applying for benefits now?
Sure. Thank you, Jillian. So I'm Sharna Whitby. I'm the Assistant Director for First Five, Riverside County. We're a county department that focuses on investment in early childhood and family support programs, and we operate 5 of our county's family resource centers, which serves the whole gamut of families and really generalized services and supports. And a large part of that job is really helping families connect to benefits and other services. So, the barriers really aren't that mysterious. They're the ones that we run into all the time: of time, repetition, quality, and really staff and family overwhelm or fatigue, I think, in these processes. So I think the main ones for us really are that families spend hours retelling their stories. Every agency really asks for the same type of paperwork, and families end up re-traumatized and repeating the same sensitive histories through the process. In Riverside, we've made a lot of progress with horizontal integration in our systems, so families don't have to start from zero every time. But once we move into those applications for specific programs with their own eligibility thresholds, that progress really hasn't caught up yet. And at our FRCs, our family resource centers, it's not unusual to see families come back 2 days or 3 days in a row just to finish applications, because going one at a time really does take that long. And applications can be confusing and prone to error, and families often don't know if they're qualify until too late in the process or very late in the process. So that overwhelm and fatigue is real. And our caseworkers are trained to be social workers, not to be benefit specialists. So they can't memorize every cliff or exception. And that creates a really vulnerable place for the families and for staff when they're trying to, only thing that we're trying to do is find support. So I think that's where I'd leave it.
Thank you, Sharna. Sort of tackling an administrative burden isn't necessarily, an unfamiliar problem. Again, we're here at FormFest, but the idea of using AI agents is sort of new and a more experimental solution. So this question is for Stephen. Can you introduce yourself as well and kind of walk us through what is an AI agent and what does that mean for one to apply for benefits or help someone apply for benefits?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Jillian. I'm Stephen Rockwell. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer with the nonprofit organization that produces Benefit Navigator. We're changing our name from Imagine LA to Amplify. So if you're in LA on October 22nd, come to our rebranding party. An agent essentially, first of all, there's been a ton of talk about it, right? Many have deemed this the year of the agent. I think that was a little oversold, but really it's a software that's perceiving, that's reasoning and doing some decision making and then taking some action, right? And autonomously, usually with some sort of tooling, right? And so it's taking what sort of the content creation of an LLM and the deductive capacities, and actually then here's some tools to then make some decisions and do something with those tools, right? And that's essentially, and really, from my perspective, like this is the holy grail in some ways. Like if we can automate as much of this as possible, our CEO Jill Bowman calls it like the ultimate administrative burden buster. Over time, again, we'll get into this. We're really just testing right now, but over time, the ability for agents to potentially, do away with forms, and a few years from now, this is called Agent Fest 2028 instead of Form Fest 2025. That might be sort of like where we're headed, and we think there's a huge amount of potential, even though it's really early stage.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, it is really early stage, and it's been so fun to do so much of this testing work, and it's also sort of changed our design and development process too. And that we've always worked iteratively. We try and work in sort of that agile practice, but because it's emerging tech, we want to also try and experiment with how we're working and sort of push that more nimble approach even further. So, Kaylin, for you, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how developing an AI tool has, changed the typical design and development process, and what's different, what's the same from traditional collaboration?
Yeah. So I'm Kaylin Van Nostrand. I'm a software engineer at Nava. So basically, previously, when we were developing, I would develop by getting a UI and having basically a one-off handoff with design. So, but now it's more of a back and forth interaction with development and design. Basically, AI is powerful in making our development a lot faster. So it can come up with an idea that either I didn't think about, and then I can bring it back to Jillian here. Or I code something, we refine it together. And it's just like the tech is so new and that new features keep coming out every day that it's more of a collaboration for us. So it's a lot of back and forth.
A lot of fun back and forth, for sure. And then stepping out of, Kaylin and I's world as we're going back and forth, passing things back and forth and asking for each other for feedback. Sharna, can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to bring government stakeholders along in this work too?
Yeah, happy to. Trust is hard. I think this is doing things outside of our norm or outside of our trusted processes can be difficult, but I think it's come from really communicating openly and really centering on process and validating the purpose. So I've been really transparent in countywide leadership meetings and in all of our staff meetings, every step of the way, sharing not just the tool, but my thinking about workflow integration and really centering on the workflow integration. Honestly, I think this is one of the prettiest and coolest things that I've ever been a part of, but the tool is really not the point. The point is solving the problem that everyone in government recognizes, that we want to get services to families that need them. And this is just one way to get there that improves a lot of the access and quality and capacity issues that families face and that staff face. I've really framed the AI as a tool and not as the vault. It supports staff and families. It doesn't hoard client data, and that really matters a lot for the trust, because I think that's a really important key to the trust. But I think also that comes from the approach of this team, from NAVA and Benefit Navigator. You've been building this with us, not for us. And I think that personal connection and centering on understanding workflow and how we're trying to serve our population, that trust really matters for our teams. And I think that's gotten us where we've gotten so far.
Totally. Thank you. Yeah. Trust has come up in the government stakeholder conversations. It's come up in user testing, of course, with stakeholders and with clients and their families, with caseworkers and their families. And I see it also coming up in the Q&A too. Trust and privacy is really one of the top priority for us to think about in this work. And that's what's it's scary, it's exciting, but also it's really important. We'll touch on it a little bit later in the session, but something that Sharna said was that it's not really about the tool. It's kind of about like improving, thinking about it systematically. And I want to hear from Stephen about how we're thinking about balancing the sort of like experimentation and learning with still delivering something that's like functional and meaningful enough to test as we look forward to this fall where we're actually piloting with caseworkers and families. I'm curious to hear from you. How do you think about balancing those things? We want to test, but we also want to learn. We want to deliver something that's real and useful and not all, speculative.
Yeah, totally great question. I think as Kaylin was saying earlier, this is really new technology. It's changing every day. The technologies we're using have pretty much all come onto the market in the last year, right? So we would not have been able to have the same sort of solutioning a year ago that we do today. And, that could change. It can change in the course of the project. And so there is like a little bit of then needing to experiment that much more because of the newness of the technology. It's not just like getting the right fit and with sort of the processes and people in Riverside. It's actually learning together. And that's going to serve us down the road when we actually do have something that we want to implement, right? So like we're baking in all of the change management. Sharna is change management queen in Riverside County in some ways, with sort of her, like with both her team and the other stakeholders who we meet with regularly to make sure that everyone is sort of aware, has seen the experiments, seen the video you just saw. We just demoed that last week, right? So the change management is baked in to the discovery and experimentation process, which means downstream when we're ready, like we should have a much higher percentage of likelihood of a successful implementation.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's important to note too that like as we're working on this and it feels super new, also the tech industry is working on this and it's super new for them. Like, for example, ChatGPT, they released their agent mode like just a few months into our work. And that did give us like an existential moment. We were like, what is the value of what we're building versus something that's already off the shelf and, has the power of big tech behind it. But Kaylin and I kind of sat down with the rest of the team and thought through, okay, what are some of the things that we can offer as, being embedded within Riverside and being really grounded in their user needs? And what can we learn from some of the more like commercial off the shelf products that are more for general use? Kaylin, can you talk about that a little bit, about how we've been sort of navigating those trade-offs and making comparisons between what's out there and what we can build?
Sure. One thing to point out is that the more mainstream that AI becomes, the more the public gets used to it and how to interact with it, and what they can use it for. Right now, with the new tech coming out, we can build off of this tech that is already out there, and be able to go beyond, basically cater to our users and use accessibility in our design and meet the demands of the public.
Yeah, accessibility is something that's been coming up for us too. A lot of, as a consequence of the work being so fast on the tech side, unfortunately, I do think accessibility gets overlooked in some ways. So that's something that we're excited to continue to learn about, continue to try to push the envelope on in our work too. Another project we've had is trying to figure out our evaluation approach. For those who might not be familiar, AI evals is sort of a whole beast within itself, in that it's a little bit challenging to try and evaluate the performance of an agent or an AI system versus a traditional product, in that, AI is non-deterministic. And I think the evaluation part of the work is also an important part of how we build trust with users as well. If we can say that, with some certainty, that the agent is performing well in certain areas, but maybe not as well in other areas. But Stephen, for folks who may not be familiar with evals, can you just give an overview of what that is and why it's important for us to consider here?
Totally, and it's actually shifted quite a bit for those who are doing intelligent automation with robotic process automation, RPA, even in the last couple of years in government. That one thing that is the same between RPA evaluation and an agent evaluation is it doing what we want it to do, consistently and accurately, right? But that's sort of where it stops in some ways, because there are other dynamics here. Is it inferring well? Is it making the right inference and then the right sort of decision from that? How is the interaction with humans and evaluating that? Where are the right points for human oversight versus autonomous decision making, and trying to figure that piece out? There isn't necessarily a right answer to that. And so it's a much more sort of robust evaluation, and that's why Jillian and team, I feel like, are so vital to this. That it's not just the is the technology performing doing what it's supposed to do. It's how it's interacting, and ultimately, from an outcome perspective, are we seeing more accurate applications being processed than the historical process? And so ultimately, there's also an outcome measurement to this as well.
Yeah, right. And something sort of meta that was hard for me to get my head around as someone who's not a big tech person or a big AI person was the idea that we could have AI evaluate itself, and that AI can evaluate another AI system. And Kaylin, we've built some they're called auto evals for language preference. Can you share a little bit about that work so far?
Yeah. So the tech that we're using is something called a score system that is take off of evals. It's like an addition to it. Basically, when we were developing it, it was at the same time that the creators were writing the documentation for it. But right now, our current model has a language preference evaluator, which means that it either views the user data or, through the interaction with the user, determines their language preference and switches the website to match that. We're also working towards many other evals. One in particular is hallucination or no hallucination, which would prevent the model from making assumptions on data that it doesn't have with data that it has.
Thank you. I want to transition us a little bit from all the work that we've done so far, to now reflecting a little bit about some of the learnings. I think let's start first with what we've heard from user testing. Sharna, we've had several of your staff members test the prototype. We've done interviews with them. Can you share what you've heard so far about what they think of the prototype?
Sure. What I've heard from staff is relief, honestly. They see the potential for something that takes work off of their shoulders instead of adding another screen or another login. In discovery, I think a lot of the feedback was really about sheer time and that repetition that goes with that, and of having to face or interact with families' overwhelm, having to re-enter that same data across systems, or guide families through all of the forms, kind of resets or safeguards that relationship. A lot of the staff have liked the way the prototype showed its work. So seeing the browser activity has made everyone feel like they weren't losing control, or that they could steer at any given point. That's gone a really long way for not just trust building, but in terms of the assister role of applications to have the responsibility that it be full and accurate and complete for families. And they've really appreciated that it's not trying to replace staff roles, that it's really centering staff roles. It's not about being an expert on any benefit cliff or memorizing more rules or more technology. The tool really is helping with that heavy lift, so that we can focus on relationships, because relationships is really what matters, and getting more support. And this enables that connection over everything rather than taking away from it. And I think that's a huge, huge relief.
I'm relieved to hear the relief. I want to touch on too, now that we've, talked through some of the higher level stuff, get a little bit more specific about trust built through like privacy and security too. So Kaylin, can you speak to some of the questions that are coming up in the chat, or Stephen, around like, where is this data coming from? How is it being stored, if at all? What kinds of considerations have we made and decisions that we've made to make sure that, client data is safe?
Yeah, go off of what I started typing. Okay, so currently what we have right now is dummy data. We are working on security agreements to connect to Riverside's DB, which does not have any PII. We only want read access to the data so that we protect the data and the AI doesn't touch it or modify it in any way. Our ideas are, it won't hold anything. We are training the model to make sure that it has a user interaction, so that it evaluates what it's doing, make sure that it's doing it correctly. I think I covered some. Let me know if I'm missing one. Yeah. Also adding in authentication to it itself. So only caseworkers have access to this, nobody else. And the evals will be training it. So it also is another added layer of protection to our bot to make sure that it's not touching anything it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I would just add to that like I heard in a separate session, not to be controversial here, but like that we would put no PII through an LLM, and I don't know that that's a legitimate proposition for engaging agentic AI moving forward. I think there's all kinds of safeguards that we can take around not holding on to data, making sure that we've scrubbed. But I do think that realistically, where the LLM sits is an important question, and different agencies are going to have different answers to that, and they're going to have different comfort levels. But I think the comfort levels and the security guarantees from the LLM providers have increased appreciably over the last year or two. And so I think that narrative in some ways is changing, which, I mean, obviously with with an agentic project, you're moving data around. We're going to have some touch points with PII to submit an application. But as Kaylin said, we're learning a lot. We're working with the IT team in Riverside County to make sure that they're sort of on board and that they're guiding us around data security. And so we're covering our bases, like there are some potential touch points with PII and LLMs.
Sharna, do you have anything to add there?
I would add that I think that this is, there's a huge learning curve here, of course, where we see our role in all spaces outside of this project, but in all spaces as stewards and not keepers of data anyway. We try not to stockpile data and process it only for the family's benefit. So I think that this is one of those learning places of where those guardrails are. And I'm thankful that this team has been so patient and thoughtful in this exploration with us. And it's going to be a different guardrail in the next year than it is this year, for sure, as we build and learn, and this is tested in more systems. But for now, knowing that we are letting the families decide where their data sits has been one of the larger, more important guardrails of this project.
Right. I'll mention too that something that we've been enjoying building out in the design prototype is the consent screen. Normally that's something you just kind of show as like a modal, you check it off and you try and move as fast as possible through it. But an opportunity that we're thinking about is using the tools sort of onboarding screens as a way to, educate the user, whether that be the caseworker or the client or both of them sitting down together about what is an AI agent, how does this work, where is my data going, knowing that it's a big responsibility that, this might be the first time some people have encountered an AI system before. So how can we make sure that, they get their task, their, user task completed, but also that they walk away with some more confidence and also more understanding of how these systems work, as Stephen's alluding to, as we anticipate, them becoming more and more, common in day-to-day life. How can we make this experience one that, helps them complete their applications, but also, again, like introduces them to some of this technology in a respectful and plain language using way. Let's see, we're running a little bit short on time, so feel free to continue to put some questions in the chat. But I guess as we start to wrap up here, can each of you share a thought or two around if other teams are interested in pursuing this work, what should they consider? Where should they start? What's applicable to other contexts within the benefit application space, but also with outside of it? I'm curious to hear just from each of you what you think might be a helpful takeaway for folks.
I can get started because both here and some of the other work I'm doing with government, really, some of the first steps are really to define the workflow and really do that work that's all sort of pre-tech around like this step, this step, this step. Wait a second. Then there's a disagreement about, well, who does that and what is that process exactly? Getting some clarity on that first to then figure out what your automation options are, and then having that conversation, to me, just in general, whether it's in a benefits access context or sort of any process that has forms in it, to me seems like what are the processes driving that form, both on the front end and back end, and then looking for the opportunities. Are there some low-hanging fruit there for an agent that's maybe a little lower risk on data security, doesn't have any PII in it, that kind of thing? That to me is the right starting point.
I agree with that so much, that designing for the workflow has been an incredibly important piece to this and what we've gotten right, or that this team has gotten right in the reality. But I think also not separating experimentation from the purpose, that the North Star has to stay the same. And the North Star for us is improving the lives of our population, our families that live in Riverside, but improving the lives of our staff in all the spaces of, we know we're getting it right when it does that, and keeping that North Star kind of the purpose is expecting messiness as we get there, but keeping the North Star center is important.
Mine's more on the developing of it. My advice is don't get attached to anything. AI is always changing and always updating. That UI in the demo was probably the 7th one that I made in a span of like a week. Yeah.
I take that personally because every time you guys show me anything, it's the most beautiful thing I've seen, and I want to keep it because it solves so many problems, and I feel like it gets so precious that I can't let go, but it gets better and better and better, so I'm trying to trust that process.
Thank you. Okay, let's move into some of the Q&A. I see some more questions around sort of this more specificities of how we're communicating with users. So I see one here. What does Sharna mean when she said that, quote, we let families decide where their data sits as a guardrail?
Sure. Families own their story, so they decide what they submit. That has always been true for us, that we are the assisters. We're not the keepers of their data or of their stories. And when we think about that we're helping them with their applications, we're not submitting applications on their behalf or doing it separately from them. So when we think about the AI piece and how we're introducing that into workflow or into a family's application process, we're really looking at that as the AI is a tool to help us reduce those kind of prove yourself moments and keep that kind of dignity at the center for families, that they get to choose what and when and how their data is shared, and kind of get out of those uncomfortable positions sometimes. And so, and we don't keep it if they don't want us to. There's a lot of different consent checkpoints, from our intake process to the application process to the resourcing process. All of those have different say yes moments. I don't know if that answered it, but I hope it did.
Yeah, I think we're thinking a lot about the sort of different gates of like continuously sort of checking in and reiterating what's being collected or what's not, and continuously bringing that up as part of the flow without making it feel like cumbersome or, additional sort of speed bumps in the way of the experience. But we're almost out of time. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everything, but we are happy to continue the conversation offline. We can follow up with some of y'all after the session ends and make sure we answer your questions asynchronously. Thank you all for joining. If you want to stay up to date on the work, feel free to follow any of our organizations online. There's a Nava Labs newsletter where we share things out really frequently. That's kind of part of our ethos of how we want to work. So I'll put the link to that in the chat. But otherwise, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. Really feel grateful to have these folks as teammates in this work. So thank you all so much.